All right, and I'd like to remind everybody to please make sure you are muted so you don't disturb others that are speaking. And if you have any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat and they will be addressed at the end of the presentation. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the Sustainable Water Networks River Series. I'm Kristen Wolf, the coordinator for this group. And this coalition came together about 6 years ago to focus on getting more water for our drying up rivers and to work for better watershed health policies. As we all know, Arizona water laws neglect the health of our rivers and our watersheds. So we're trying to get laws changed to address all of this neglect. And this river series is to help raise awareness of what's happening to all the rivers in the various parts of the state, and to use local experts and people in the community that have a relationship with these rivers to better inform everybody of what's happening to them and what can be done to better help them. And tonight we have an expert panel on the Agua Fria River. And we're going to hear from Ann Hutchinson from the Black Canyon Heritage Park, Tim Flood from the Agua Fria National Monument, Tony Angueira with the Yavapai County Flood Control District, and Mary Hoadley from the Upper Agua Fria Watershed Partnership. So Ann is the co-chair of the Black Canyon Heritage Park, which is a riparian preserve along the Agua Fria in Black Canyon City. She was also on the chair of the Smithsonian Waterways exhibit that was held at the Canyon Elementary School. And Ann, along with the panelists tonight and some others, developed the Agua Fria Watershed website and traveling exhibit. So I now welcome Ann and the panelists, and I'll turn this over to Ann to introduce the other speaker.
Thank you, Kristen. First, if Mary, if you can introduce yourself. You may be on mute, Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Hoadley, chair of the Upper Agua Fria Watershed Partnership, which has been meeting informally every month since 1999 when we were formed. And we cover the 1,200 square miles of the watershed.
Great, thank you. Tim?
Good evening, I'm Tim Flood. I am with the Friends of the Agua Fria National Monument. And with the Friends group, I head up the water team for the Friends group, and I've been in that role for about 15 years.
Thank you. Tony?
Hi, I'm Tony Angueira, stormwater engineer for Yavapai County Flood Control District and a member of various community groups around the Verde Valley and the Agua Fria watershed.
Great. With that, we'll start on the presentation. And the first thing I want to do is talk where the Agua Fria River headwaters are up by Prescott, and then it ends at the Gila River. And you have about 120 miles of river, most of it in Yavapai County, which we'll be addressing primarily. And the water rights, the surface water rights north of Lake Pleasant are held by the Maricopa Water District since 1888. It's an interesting story and very senior water rights. Then the Agua Fria watershed is outlined here in brown. It's at least 3,300 miles of streams, and note that only 9.6 is still perennial, and that may be less as the drought continues. And that's one of our concerns, is that it will be less. And there's 10 major watersheds. And as I say, we're concerned with the upper Agua Fria watershed. That's the area north of Lake Pleasant. It's primarily rural. It's mostly outside of the AMA. There's a little tiny bit of AMA up here, Prescott, which means there isn't a whole lot of controls about how much people withdraw from their wells. It is part of the Agua Fria adjudication area, but it probably won't be adjudicated till sometime past 2026. The the upper Agua Fria watershed minus the AMA, and you'll see a lot of maps like this one that are called the Agua Fria Basin, and excluding the AMA. And you'll see most of it is federal land. A little bit, the rest of it, a little over 20%, is basically developable. And a lot of that's along the highway corridors. And although this study done in 2001 doesn't mention how much is owned by the county, but they do have at least one park and 90 flood parcels, some of which may have been before, but we have not a lot of data on this watershed. It's one of the things that we're crying out for, to get state and volunteers to get more data. There is some data on the water level change 93 to 2013 that from ADWR data Paul Hurt provided us during Smithsonian. But you see this pink area, which the watershed fits into. Even during that period, it was either 20 feet down or zero, no pluses. And then there was some more study from the Arizona water blueprint. Again, you can see, one, there's not very many monitoring wells, and for the most part, was declining. And the biggest drop is right here, which is about where the monument sunset point at negative 20 feet, 26 feet. And just as a reminder, you've seen this before, there's only about 0.4% of Arizona land that's still riparian. We've lost most of it. Nature Conservancy did a study at some point where we had lost at least 90%. And yet at least 80% of all vertebrate species spend some time of their life cycle in riparian. So another reason why it's so critical to protect it. In the watershed, there's at least, there's over 600 wildlife. These are just a sample to show the variety. And of course, it varies according to groundwater and elevation and all those other factors. There are other uses too. It's not just nature that we're worried about. Ranchers and farmers and mining and tourists, schools, population centers, and so much more. And then the recreation, which is huge and growing, especially since COVID. People are just loving our land to death. And there's a lot of variety of what's there. You got residences and businesses. We even have a hydroelectric power plant down at Waddell Dam. And this on the right is a sort of a general map of what happens. This is the top one. There's no wells. The water comes in, hits the aquifer, and it goes to surface water. You get some wells, and that becomes limited. And you get a lot of wells, the chances it will dry out your riparian stream surface water areas. And as mentioned before, the state has very little groundwater surface water relationship management. And outside the active management area, which is most of the area we're concerned about, the wells are not restricted. Plus, there's not a whole lot of documentation on groundwater quantity or quality. And as Audubon noted, the greatest threat is the increased groundwater pumping along I-17. And more recently, we're seeing it on some other, like Highway 69 corridors. This is just a bigger illustration of the Kona depression effect, which is just an Arizona term because we don't recognize groundwater and surface water connection. And imagine this little well in the middle is a whole lot of wells is basically what happens. It draws it from the stream and stops it from going to the stream. And this, just threw this in kind of for grins. The outline in blue is Yavapai County. And if you go to the Arizona Department of Water resource to look at their wells, 55 series, that's all those wells. So we're just getting more and more measles. And this is to show you the economic value. It's not specific to the Agua Fria, but in Yavapai County, which does include the Verity, which is bigger than ours, but $1 billion generated annually from recreation on or along rivers, lakes, and streams, and statewide 13.5. So very important for the state to really take an active role in protecting our rivers, lakes, and streams. This is another source that was, interesting is this video, Understanding the Fire Effects of Sonoran Desert. The Southwest Fire Science Consortium put it together, and we're not going to watch it, but and we'll put all these links. The last slide will have a lot of these links, and then it'll also be on the website. We'll put the website link to the links in the chat later on. But there's a 2-minute section done by Kelly Mox Locks, the forest hydrologist at Tonto National Forest. And in that, the basic message is, if the riparian area is healthy, they can be a barrier to floods, fire and floods. So, and I mentioned that there's not much data on the quality, and this is certainly, I'm missing the top of my slides. The water sentinels need volunteers, but their whole purpose is to protect, improve, and restore the Arizona waters through volunteer water quality monitoring, public education, which is huge, and citizen action. And I know the Friends of Agua Fria National Monument would be interested, but they would need more volunteers also. So you'll hear that a lot. We need a lot of volunteers, and there's training available to be citizen scientists. And so at this point, I'll turn it over to Tim. I'm going to stop sharing so he can pull up his.
Okay, let's see if I can start my show. And then I need to share my screen first. Sorry for the fumbling here. So are you seeing a
Yes, it's
slide?
good.
You're
The
seeing
whole
it?
thing.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good, thank you. So again, I'm Tim Flood. I'm with the Friends of the Agua Fria National Monument. And I'm going to talk a lot about the Agua Fria National Monument itself. It's a component, one of the larger components of the watershed. And I'll talk about the resources that are out there, and then some of the issues and management issues that we see. The monument, these 71,000 acres in the monument were declared a national monument in January 2000 by President Clinton, with a directive for the BLM to protect its remarkable cultural and natural features. The lands and prehistoric sites on the monument have ties to Arizona's Yavapai and Hopi peoples, and archaeologists use the term Perry Mesa tradition when referring to the prehistoric occupants. The archaeologic sites are rarely far from the riverine features, and this is the view at the Horseshoe Ranch. So drilling down to the monument, which is circled here, it's in about the middle of the watershed. There are 23 miles of the Agua Fria River in the monument, and 47 miles of riparian corridor. These riparian areas provide important water sources, habitat, corridors, and resting areas for migrating species. Do take note of this Mayer gauge at the top end of the monument. I'll be referring to several figures that include data from this Mayer gauge. The Big Bug Creek comes in from this west side, and Black Canyon Creek, another major tributary connects way down here in Black Canyon City. So it's really not in the monument itself. So we're going to take a closer look. So welcome to the river. It's this ribbon of green among the Sonoran Desert. The river is home to a climax riparian area with a canopy of Fremont cottonwood, Gooding willow, and Arizona ash. In other places, the river looks more like this, an open, dry river bottom down in the gorge to the east side of Sunset Point rest area. Not many people get out here, but this is what it looks like out there. The Agua Fria corridor has been designated by Audubon Southwest as a IBA, or important bird area. And these are some of the examples of riparian dependent species that we see out there. There's well over 100 species that have been reported from various locations on the monument, and even 124 down in Black Canyon Heritage Park where Ann works. Lately, we started doing some trail camera work, and this is just what we picked up over the last year of critters that are traversing the riparian corridor. So it's serving a very important function as a corridor. So I'm going to lead you through some of the hydrographs. This is a hydrograph from that Mayer gauge. The data we have goes back to 1940 up to 2021 and 2022, but that we don't have a complete year for that one. This is showing on the y-axis the yield in acre feet. And the one thing you can see about this is there's nothing typical. There's no typical year when discussing the river flow. Across all the years, the average is about 15,000 acre feet, but there's considerable year-to-year variation. In this most recent 28 years, down in the lower right here, the river has fallen short of its average for 22 of the 28 years. So we are in a drought. So it's hard to visually show the impacts of low flows, but I'm going to try with say this picture here. So this is a mature cottonwood grove that died last year in 2021. Many trees have fallen over, and in previous years, these trees reliably contained a yellow-billed cuckoo nest. So they're goners. The question we might ask ourselves is, where are the replacement saplings in this picture? I don't see any. And so it's going to be a while before the replacement cottonwoods come in to replace these dying ones and dead ones. I have several key messages that I want to make sure I emphasize. So the first one here is that the Agua Fria River already is experiencing zero flow conditions. For those on the call tonight, you may recall Gary Beverly from the Verde River Citizens Water Advocacy Group. He's pointed out that the upper Verde River is headed for zero flow days in the near future. Well, for the Agua Fria, we've run a similar analysis, and we see that the Agua Fria River already is experiencing the onset of zero flow conditions, especially over the last decade, down here on the bottom right. And this is expressed in cubic feet per second. So, 3, 2, 1 cubic foot, half a cubic foot. So this is very low flow down here, and some of them indeed are zero. And this is what it looks like in person, on scene. So at 0.03 cubic feet per second, which is maybe less than a quart per second, this is what the flow would look like. So the river depth here, which is hard to see, but it's less than 1 inch deep here. The river lacks a gauge specific for measuring low flows. Instead, it has this column, tubular column here, and it's very good at measuring higher flows, but measuring low flows is difficult. I can hear Will Rogers saying about this picture, if this were his river, he'd mow it. At the invitation of a local rancher, we've monitored Big Bug Creek, which is actually off the monument, but we monitor it as part of our wet dry mapping program. In the mid 2010s, an upstream municipal well provided a large amount of groundwater for a nearby highway construction project. And that pumping was associated with a 5-year dry up of this segment. So this is what it looked like before, and this is what it looked like during and after the pumping. So we lost frogs, turtles, longfin dace, and bats, and a watering source for the cattle ranch and other wildlife watering source. So on the monument, we have a number of species that are at risk of having this happen to them. There are threatened, endangered, proposed, and candidate species. The ones in red are actually have not been seen or only seen with a great deal of support, human support to keep them in the area. So our fear is that we may lose, if we don't keep the water coming, we may lose these species in the area. My second message about the watershed and the monument is that the river is experiencing destructive peak flows. Again, this is a hydrograph, years on the x-axis and flow in cubic feet per second on the y. And look at you can see that in the last 20, 30 years, we've had these massive flows, more than 10,000, more than 20,000 cubic feet per second flowing there. And that is very harmful, and it's likely an indication of poor upland range conditions. So these flows can damage the channel, they can cause scouring, loss of habitat, bank erosion with loss of ability to store water in the bank, and siltation. I'm going to show you some of that. So the scouring, these very high flows will sweep away all the vegetation in the channel. The bank erosion looks like this, where we have severe entrenchment of the channel. And in Black Canyon City, it looks, the bank erosion looks like this, with collapse of this bank and impending loss of soil holding vegetation. They're about to fall into the river. On Big Bug Creek, these high flows have caused loss of soil in the channel and exposed the roots of this cottonwood. So this soil got swept away. I'm drawing it where the soil level used to be, but it gets nailed if the flows are too high. And it brings, the high flows bring down sand. Sand continues to flow off the scar that was left by the massive 2005 Cave Creek complex fire. The channels fill with sand and lose the aquatic habitat. This is what it looks like on Bishop Creek. Sand erosion continues from that Cave Creek complex fire. And I want to talk a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes. So here's on the left side here is a balanced state that occurs when the rate of infiltration of water into soil matches the rainfall rate. But should the infiltration rate decrease, say due to a fire scar or overgrazing or clearing of vegetation, then runoff occurs. And if the runoff is excessive, it can transport soil, sand, rocks that compose the surface cover. And on a graph, it looks like this. You can see that grass-covered soil has a much higher rate of water infiltration than crop grown soil, and the lowest infiltration rate happens with bare soil. My third message is that land management at the local scale affects river and riparian conditions. Through Stream Monitor, the Friends Group engages the public in order to build support for proper management. And these are some of the activities that we do, and I'll talk a little bit about these. So photo point, wet dry mapping, bird monitoring, and OHV barrier monitoring. One of our more popular activities is the wet dry mapping of the upper Agua Fria River. We do this to show the spatial extent of surface flow at a critical time of the year in late June. And the purpose really of doing the mapping is to demonstrate the on-site values and water dependent features of streams. In other words, we get our volunteers out there so they can actually see how rivers work. So each of the, this is 7 years worth of data that's now compiled into this one column here that says total. So when you make a composite of those 7 years and then exclude any year in which we missed, couldn't get a complete count, you end up with blue, meaning wet or perennial, and red meaning dry, and then the intermediate status in between. So, you know, if we keep doing this, when we do have the data up through 2022, we can actually see which parts of the river are perennial and which are intermittent and which are ephemeral. In 2022, this is what the data look like. We were not able to do all the segments that we wanted to do. So the ones painted red are dry, and blue are the wet ones. So it was about a third wet and 2/3 dry last year. On Badger Springs, we monitor the stream channel. Unfortunately, we see ATV use in there. The tire tracks actually channel the water in bad ways. And if they get stuck, then they have to dig themselves out, and that causes additional harm to the channel. This western thread snake lives in the leafy debris and sand that's been disturbed by the ATV that got stuck. And we get volunteers out there to pick up the trash and remove tamarisk. I want to talk a little bit about fire because it's becoming an increasing problem on the watershed. That fire that you saw in Black Mesa swept 20,000 acres overnight on Black Mesa. And I was able to get out there a couple weeks after the fire and got right to the edge where the fire extended and then stopped. And you can see the invasive oats and black mustard, Sahara mustard out here. The soil is completely charred, and it burnt a lot of prickly pear out there. And we'll continue to monitor the recovery of the mesa top. Cattle ranching in a desert ecosystem creates challenges for proper management. An adult cow consumes about 20 pounds of vegetation per day. In the hot season, when grasses dry up on the range, cattle often are drawn into the cooler, lusher vegetation in wet riparian areas. On the monument, the current resource management plan permits grazing in the riparian areas in the winter non-growing season, defined as November 1st to March 1st. However, trespass cattle often are observed at other times in the riparian areas. An email to the agency range staff generally results in their removal, especially if a cattle brand is photographed. But it is a constant struggle for ranchers, agency staff, and concerned public to respond to grazing. We do monitoring for yellow-billed cuckoo, and they migrate up from Central America in June and August. They are an indicator of healthy habitat. A number of partners participate in this. We conducted a total of 23 surveys this summer in 2022 of 5 areas and had 64 detections, which is good. Some of that was down on the Tres Rios area and the Phoenix area, but we had a lot of good detections up on the monument. It's a fun activity to be out there actually hiking in the heat. There's a lot of shade if you get a good spot to survey. My fourth message is that humans control the water allowance for streams. So healthy rivers require both healthy surface flow and sufficient ground flow. And rivers need water to sustain these green trees through the photosynthesis process. At that Mayo gauge I talked about, this is what photosynthesis and evapotranspiration looks like 2 weeks ago. So you can see this little dip in the flow rate. That little dip is the consumption by the trees of water in the stream that's needed. They take up water and CO2, and they exhale. The trees exhale oxygen and grow trees. So in this particular area, the consumption was about 1 gallon per second. The aquatic habitat out there needs water to sustain it, to sustain those aquatic species. When you get a shrinking pool like this, this turtle didn't make it in that scenario. So in my concluding thoughts are that healthy rivers need healthy uplands. Without an assured supply of surface water, the perennial reaches of the Agua Fria will degrade and fragment into intermittent and ephemeral reaches. And we have to ask ourselves, how can we better understand the current groundwater trends? We need the resources and wells out there and monitoring of those to answer the question. So with that, I'm going to stop my sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Tony. And he's going to talk about the flood control district for Yavapai County.
Thank you, Tim. And getting to the start of my slides here. And so yes, I'm Tony Angueira from Flood Control District. I'm County Stormwater Engineer. Next slide. So at the Flood Control District, in accordance with Arizona revised statutes for flood control districts, we're empowered to promote public health, safety, and general welfare by minimizing the loss of life and damage to property due to flooding. Additionally, we can compile data reports for researchers or people buying properties. In the flood control district, we've got 5 elements, and those would be leadership. We have a director, hydrology. If you contact the flood control district for customer service, generally you will be speaking with a hydrologist. Flood warning, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Engineering. Within the engineering element is our CRS, the Community Rating System Specialist, District Engineer, Project Manager, and myself, the Stormwater Engineer. And then our administrative functions that keep the whole place moving, keep the trains on time, as they say. So the Flood Control District was established about 41 years ago here for Yavapai County. And really what we do, especially relative to this discussion here today, is that we advocate for the responsible use of water as a resource through our partnerships with organizations and participation with community groups and other outreach and education initiatives. The picture there on the left shows us just a couple of weeks ago out at Project Wet over in Cottonwood. Next slide. So some of the examples of how we ensure public safety, and this is by no means all encompassing. These are just a few examples. But we acquire flood prone properties. Flood control district parcels in that Mayor, Spring Valley area and down in Cordis Lakes areas of the Agua Fria watershed. And we do that just for the purpose of keeping those safely out of the hands of developers, essentially, so that we can make sure that we don't end up with some kind of flooding emergency or repeated flood damage on those properties. We operate an alert flood warning system that's continuously maintained, upgraded, and modernized. We have lots of signs on county roads. You've probably seen them: do not cross when flooded, or turn around, don't drown. Some of those signs are permanent. Some of them are only put out during flooding times. We have lots of projects to help control flooding and try to mitigate issues around the county. And some of those are ponds, lots of drainage improvement projects. There are places where we have gabion, riprap, rock structures, and vegetation controls on a lot of properties throughout the county. A really important part of the customer service that we provide is to give advice on insurance in accordance with the National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP. And of course, our partnerships with groups around the county, and that includes cities, towns, nonprofits, other community groups. We'd have a hard time getting anything done without support and cooperation in both directions with lots of partners. Next slide. A big part of what we do is manage the FEMA floodplain. And this is just a simple map showing the floodplain through Cordis Lakes. And those black lines there with the numbers just show the width of those stream areas along the floodplain. Next slide. And here's a similar map through Black Canyon City. You can see that those cross sections are a bit wider. And these maps, by the way, come from our internal flood warning system dashboard. So these are things that if you requested them, we could provide these. Next slide. A little more about our alert flood warning system. ALERT is an acronym that stands for Automated Local Evaluation in Real Time. If you're looking at our website, you can see weather events as they're occurring, precipitation, stream flows as they're occurring. And the system was developed about 50 years ago by the National Weather Service. It operates on a pretty reliable RF network. So that system's got, like I said, the real-time data shows up. It's for our precipitation gauges, stream gauges, which include transducers and radars for stream depth, and a lot of different weather sensors on some of our sites. Within our system, the sites, like the one you see pictured there on the right, transmit to repeaters stations, and the repeaters in turn transmit to the base station here in Prescott. And those signals are processed within the alert system itself, and they're analyzed here by the flood warning manager. And there's our website there at the bottom. So if you want to see that data right now, today, tomorrow, we've got a weather system coming in the next couple of days, so you'll be able to see all that on there. And the picture on the right is our gauge, the Agua Fria above Black Canyon City gauge. Excuse me. And so I'm going to talk about that gauge in particular a little bit more as we move in, as we go forward. Next slide. So within the Agua Fria watershed, we've got 24 gauging sites. And that's what you can see, those little green dots there in the map in the center of the slide. And they're all listed to the right. The ones that are listed to have the longer numbers at the front, those are ones that have been upgraded to the most modern, up-to-date system. And slowly but surely, the rest of them will be updated as well. Next slide. This is an example of the hydrometeorological data that we can extract from the system. So this is just showing the monsoon season from this year. So it's going from June 1st to September 30th, again at that Agua Fria above Black Cannon City gauge. And so the top chart there, the top graph is precipitation rate. The second one is total precipitation accumulation. The third one is stream depth. And the bottom one is flow rate. And we get that by using a rating curve, and the US Geological Survey helps us with that. The date that I have selected there, August 22nd, is the date from the monsoon seasons where we have the greatest stream depth at that gauge. Next slide. And stormwater, so this is my job, so I thought I'd talk about it a little bit. In general, stormwater runoff does carry quite a lot of pollutants potentially to our rivers, streams, and lakes. And so to protect our waters, communities, commercial, industrial entities, and other users use best management practices to try to remove those pollutants or prevent the pollution from ever reaching the stream in the first place. We operate a general permit under the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality through the Arizona Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, AZIPTES. And an important point there is that is delegated authority from the EPA through the NPD system for ADEQ to be able to issue and oversee permits in the AZIPTES system. Within the Clean Water Act, there are 6 minimum control measures for surface water quality standards. And these are national. The first one is public education and outreach. So we get out there and talk to the community. Second is public involvement and participation, where we invite the public to comment and make suggestions on our stormwater management program. The third is the illicit discharge detection and elimination system, where I go out and collect samples and do and test water for various substances. Fourth and fifth there are construction and post-construction activities. And 6 is pollution prevention and good housekeeping, which for us in the Yavapai County Flood Control District, it really means monitoring the water and runoff at county properties that may or may not be outside of, for example, the MS4 area. MS4 is a municipal separate storm sewer system, which is the ADEQ general permit that we operate. So the Yavapai County Flood Control District is committed to clean water for all of us and for the environment. Healthy upland and riparian habitats with the right insects and amphibians and fish and birds and mammals and plants, the ones that really belong there, not the invasives, are the best indicators of watershed health. And at the bottom there, you can use that email address for report water pollution at yavapaiaz.gov to let us know if you encounter any pollution anywhere. That goes straight to me. And the picture on the right there is an E. coli sample. Those bubbles, they're called wells. The wells that fluoresce are positive for E. coli. So that sample right there is pretty high. Next slide. Okay, and just some final thoughts to wrap up my section. Let's all be good stewards of the Agua Fria watershed. And if you have septic systems, have them inspected and serviced every 3 to 5 years. That is an important function of watershed health. We don't want those kinds of pollutants getting into the water supply. And if you have pets, scoop the poop, pick up after your pets. And a really important part here is in these residential, commercial, industrial areas, let's keep those discharges out of our waterways. Let's keep our waters clean and healthy. All right, thank you. And back to Ann. You're muted.
I see that. Fine, thank you. So I'm gonna wrap up talking about sort of some of the water uses that need protection, the summary of the threats, and some suggestions for individuals and ideas for our leaders, and what role the Upper Agua Fria Watershed Partnership can bring. So some of the water uses needing protection because our water provides high quality drinking water, supports businesses, enriches the recreation opportunities, sustains natural habitat and wildlife, and very important, which we haven't talked about much, but we want this around for future generations. And as climate continues, are we going to lose some of these? We will, unless we take more an active role in protecting it. This is a summary too of some of our primary management threats and issues. We've talked a lot about the ground, the development with no safe field, the lack of wells monitoring, the drought pressures. This graph is similar to what Tony talked about, the sources of groundwater contamination. And we do have Tony, and he could use some help if you, contact, report anything you see, because there's all sorts of sources of groundwater contamination. Legislative inattention to rural and surface / groundwater issues. I do want to say kudos to the counties and cities. They are often trying to do something, but we really need some more attention at the state level. And of course, we do have the invasives. The potential Clean Water Act revisions. In the past administration, they revised the Clean Water Act, and in that act, Agua Fria was not protected because they only protected some rivers that were truly, the whole river or most of it was perennial. And yet 80–90% of the waters in Arizona are either ephemeral or intermittent. So, but it is now protected, but they're revising the Water Act. So we're staying closely paying attention to that. And the one reason for doing this presentation is part of our plan to make people aware just how important the Agua Fria watershed is to all sorts of uses. And at the same time, we're looking at currently there's limited plans or actions to address the social, legal, financial, and moral questions related to all of this. So there's a primary user threats, unrestrained groundwater pumping, which happens in the areas that are not active management areas, trespass grazing, recreation. A lot of the public entities are understaffed, so they can't spend as much time monitoring and encouraging best practices that they might like to. And then there are uninformed private land users and owners. We think most people want to do the right thing. They just aren't aware of what that means. And you can see the illegal off-highway use, some of the effects of that, and of course, trespass grazing. So what can you personally do? Because we want the riparian to be resilient, which is the ability to recover from disturbances and also promote long-term sustainability. So, these are the common sense ones: conserve water, leave no trace when you're out there, if anything, leave it better than what you find it, and volunteer. Volunteers, Tony talked about it, Tim talked about it, I talked about it. There's a lot of things volunteers can help with, and engage others. If I talk about them loving our areas to death, but on the other hand, if people aren't out there and being educated, they don't know what it takes to save or why it's so important. And in big red letters, let your elective and community officials and leaders know that protecting this is really important. Know who they are, attend meetings, write letters, post on the web, and vote. As one of Mary's favorite sayings lately is, the squeaky wheel gets attention. And some of the ideas that we can talk to our leaders about is provide more education. Consider and allow holders of appropriate water rights to transfer their water rights to dedicate them for environmental purpose. That does happen in other states. There are examples of it. We need more data collected on just how much groundwater we actually have and how much is being recharged. And encourage aquifer recharge through requirements and incentives, particularly in areas outside the AMA. Inside the AMA, there are already some requirements. And there are, as I say, counties and cities, some are already moving in this direction. And definitely support the Arizona natural resource economy, because that's why a lot of people come to Arizona. Encourage areas that restore riparian areas. This is a nice example from the BLM River bed restoration site. Black Canyon Heritage Park is another site to model riparian areas, what they have and the value. So now the upper Agua Fria, I'm going to stand in for Mary on this one. And Jill will talk a little bit about what the upper Agua Fria Partnership does. It provides a regular forum to engage diverse stakeholders to proactively develop, discuss, and coordinate relative objective information, collaborate on work projects, and best management policies. And here is one of our meetings. We sometimes meet at places like Arkansas, and we also have volunteer projects. And you can see from this list, it's at the very limited list, but you can see the variety of our current members. We have Yavapai County government, Arizona State, various Arizona State departments, ranchers, landowners, the Friends of Agua Fria National Monument, and the Black Canyon Heritage Park, BLM, Forest Service, and the list could go on. But you see, it's anybody with an interest in the Agua Fria watershed. These are 4 of our current projects. ADOT's I-17. We've been very involved in working with Black Canyon City, Yavapai, and recently Maricopa County. There's 65 million gallons going to be used over 3 years. A lot of it is from EPCOR reclaim water, which is great. And there's 3 wells that we're asking that they monitor the effect and notify us how much is being monitored. There's, generally we hear about some area development, the traffic stop at Cordes Junction, and there'll be other developments that come to our attention. There's a mine on the west side of I-17, on the west side of the river. They're in the testing phase now for a couple more years, but we're working with them to understand the location of their wells and how much they're monitoring. It seems like they're trying to cooperate with us so far. The Candela Solar Farm proposal is 4,500 acres of state land. It hasn't been auctioned off yet, but Arizona State Land has approved the concept. And again, we're working with state land, Candela, and we being everybody you saw on that list of people that are involved with Upper Agua Fria watershed. to mitigate the impacts on water and wildlife, particularly during construction. And one thing we did notice that sometimes when they do a proposal, sometimes the impact of water well is a little bit overlooked. So it's just, most of these proposals, if not all, are public, and it's just one more thing that we really have to ask. If it's not stated, even if it is stated, we need to ask them to tell us more about it. So our 5 focus areas for the Upper Agua Fria Watershed Partnership: watershed health, that's riparian and upland; the quantity, water demand and supply, quality, and the water rights. With that, we're going to conclude, open it up for questions. If you have more questions later, afterwards, or just contact me. I will make sure the panel knows about it. If you want to be included in the Upper Agua Fria Watershed email list to find out when the meetings are, email mary@earthhouse@aol.com. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And when you get these slides, I'll do a brief, just show you. You will get a list of, oh, there it is. Maybe you'll get this page that has a lot of the links, and the link at the top will go to a website. We'll be adding more links there. Now I will stop sharing.
All right, great. Thank you to Mary, to Ann, to Tim, to Tony. A lot of information there, all of it very important and good to know. So we have Trisha and Sandy monitoring the chat. So I'm going to turn it over to them. There's some questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, the first question in the chat was about the tiny snake in the photos, and Greg responded that he thought it was a Mexican black-neck garter snake, but is that correct?
Yeah, so there were 2 snakes I showed. One was a black-neck garter snake. It was real tiny. And then there was also a real one that looked like an earthworm, and that was a western thread snake. Good pickup, whoever asked that question.
All right. And then, are ranchers fined when cattle are in riparian areas at times of the year that they are not allowed to be there?
No, usually they're not fined, but the agency staff, depending on how aggressive they are, they get on their case and tell them, hey, you got to get your cows out of the area. We've had mixed success on the Agua Fria National Monument. In general, they're trying to do the right thing. A lot of these trespass cattle, they don't even know where they come from. Some of them are just wild cattle that get dumped out there. So it's the Wild West situation. And it's very aggravating for us who are trying to protect the riparian area.
Sandy, many of the questions actually have been answered, I think, in the chat.
Yeah, but maybe not everyone has read the chat. So I don't know. I usually
go through them.
Yeah.
Okay. But there was Tim Flood's question, I think, has not been answered. So to Tony, does the flood control district partner with agencies to try to improve upland habitat and reduce flood flows?
I could switch it. I'm having trouble.
Do you mean like Bureau of Reclamation or BLM?
Yeah, BLM or the NRCS or
we try to mostly through grants, through their grant programs, and there, we've had mixed success with that, but those are ongoing. One good thing is that we do meet. We're in touch with each other, and so we're in communication, and we're on the same page. So at least there's that.
Thanks. And you're muted.
Oh,
So
yes,
Tony,
on the,
could you answer the question on the arsenic question that somebody wrote in about?
I did. I wrote that in, and I'll just read what I wrote about the arsenic. And so usually when groundwater levels increase over the span of just a few years, as that was what the question was, something like, I think they said 5 years, they saw a gradual increase in arsenic. You know, that's something that should happen in geologic time. So you know, it shouldn't be noticed in that way. And the most likely cause is that there's less water in the ground available to dilute it. And so we know if the water depth from our wells is getting deeper, then there's less water. There are going to be higher concentrations of whatever substances are down there. In this case, we're talking about arsenic. And so our aquifers here are typically basin fill type, and arsenic is a product of that old water from volcanoes or other geologic activity from thousands of years ago on those old volcanic granitic rocks. And so you know, you don't get arsenic in water. It doesn't happen right away, is what I'm saying. It takes a long time for that to happen, especially in higher concentrations. And so what it really comes down to is just that we're sucking more water out of the ground than is being put back in. And I think we all know that story. This is just another indication of the drought situation.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions in the chat that need to be answered?
Joe
yes.
just put one.
Yeah, Joe has a nice one. Tim, it's to you. What meaningful benefits have been observed through National Monument designation at Agua Fria? It certainly has protected the river quite a bit. Tim, you're muted.
I'm
You
sorry,
want to answer that one?
I didn't hear the question.
What meaningful benefits have been observed through the National Monument designation at Agua Fria National Monument?
Well, there have been definite improvements in management of traffic and recreational use on the monument. So that's by having a resource management plan, it does allow the agency to direct their activities. Like I say, for OHV use, they're keeping the traffic on the designated roads. For the stream areas, it's allowing they're specifying that there has to be fencing put up to protect the riparian areas. That hasn't happened much. It's only starting to happen now, but we are starting to see improvements on that. For example, this whole last summer, I did not see any cattle on Silver Creek. And that was a constant battle in the past, but the placement of that fence that was prescribed, allowed by the management plan, has definitely improved things. And so there's going to be more of that that's going to happen down the road. I have to say something about BLM staff, because we've had a lot of turnover and they are very short-staffed. So it's very difficult for them to do all the things that they want to do. They're on a hiring kick right now. So if anybody's interested in knows somebody that wants to work for the BLM, have them contact them. Could be
The
a
other
job.
thing to note, before the Perry Mesa used to be state land until late 80s. Therefore, it could have been sold. So it was the first
benefit was it became BOM land, and then later got even more protection. And it has, because it's designated to protect the water resources and cultural values, it has some Federal Reserve rights, water rights, which are, although those don't kick in until 2000, they're a very strong water right, usually. So.
All right, no more questions in the chat.
I think they've all been
Okay.
answered.
All right, that's great. Well, I want to thank you, Ann and Mary and Tony and Tim, for all this great information. It's great to have all of those various parts of the Agua Fria put together in a presentation like this. And again, I thank you for all this information, and I thank all of those who are watching and participating and following our Sustainable Water Network River Series. So again, I want to thank everybody and good night.
That's nice. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.